Hey Banditos, it's Wednesday, so that means there's another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits coming right at you. Where, as always, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop. We don't just walk right in, we fling them open, and we present to you interviews with your favorite comic book creators of yesterday and today. But as always, before we do that, let's introduce ourselves, shall we? I'm Joe Marcello.
I'm Mike Farah.
And today we're bringing you an interview with someone who has a pretty interesting career, as they all do. Our guest today started his career at Valiant, where he was a penciler for XO Man of War, Bloodshot, and Harbinger, and then moved on over to Marvel, and he worked on Iron Man, Elektra, and Nova. We're talking about Mike's interview. That's right, this is a Mike on the Mic interview with none other than Chen.
Sean was, as all of our guests are, a great pleasure to talk to. And yeah, Joe gave a good rundown of his resume. He first came onto my radar, of course, at Valiant, and one of those really consistent, always there pencilers on a lot of their titles, and then moved on over to Marvel. And Iron Man is what he's primarily known for, but he has a new Kickstarter that we want you to check out. It's called EVERMIND. It just came out this week. Go look it up on Kickstarter. It's a great new sci-fi series, and we think you'll dig it. So, without further ado, let's talk to Chen. Mr. Chen. Sean, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I always look forward to these creator things that we can talk about craft rather than, what Marvel or DC is doing. So.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to be talking about your craft today, and let's start with the question we always ask first, which is, how did you first discover comic books?
Okay, so I probably am different than most creators. I actually didn't read comics growing up. I think my mom kind of knew that there's nothing good in there for her. I mean, she's being a tiger mom. So I was never really exposed to them, but I love superheroes. I knew Spider-Man and Superman. You don't have to read comics to know who they are, because an Electric Company, Spider-Man was there, and then on Saturday morning, the Justice League has Superman and all the other DC characters, and then I also like to draw, and those are my favorite subject matter for drawing. Even to this day, I still like drawing those things. And then the American comic book industry is where you actually ply your trade for that. So the closest I ever got to reading comics when I was a kid was my mom kept comics out of the house, but then Washington Post came to our house every day. So there was a daily Spider-Man in there, drawn sometimes by John Buscema or Sal Buscema, and John Romita would actually draw those, the dailies. And then on Sunday, they have the longer color versions. And that went on for years. Like, I remember I'm just devouring that. So I actually never really read an actual pamphlet comic book. And then when I started getting into art, I was classically art trained. I went to a high school with a very, very good art teacher. So I was classically trained and, drawing like landscapes and figure drawings. So my sensibilities were very different. Like, I think it was hard to kind of gel that with having to draw superheroes, because it's I think the style back then, or even now, is that Kirby and Buscema style, where they don't really look exactly like people. They're stylized, and then they're heightened to be very readable in a comic book form. And I think it's a perfect style for a comic. But I was just drawing people like I would draw in figure drawing. So I think when I was in high school, I was going on one of these painting trips, and we stopped by the meetup point for this was at a mall. So there was a Borders there, a Borders books. And they have a newsstand where you can buy magazines. So, of course, being in high school, we kind of gravitated toward the one that's covered by the black lucite cover thing. And then, that's the Penthouse and all that. And one of the ones that were covered up was Heavy Metal Magazine. And when I saw that, I opened it up, and it blew my mind, because it's comic books. But the people don't look like John Romita Jr. or they were more, I guess it was European, it's more organic. So they look like more real people. And the coloring process was not the 4-color separation thing. They actually like watercolored and did paintings. And I thought that was like really great. I thought that, they were just like so far above and beyond American comics, even though that's not the case. It's just that I think the limitations of the specific comic medium is what created that Jack Kirby style and that dynamic. They didn't have the dynamic stuff. It's just mostly just like eye level, full figure, static shots over and over again. That it's beautiful stuff, but it's not really that exciting. It doesn't really jump off the page, doesn't grab you, and there's no feeling of that male power fantasy that you would really like as a kid. But so I was really into that stuff. And then when it came time to put a portfolio together, I discovered the local comic book scene, and I would go to these shows and bring work around. And, my work was always like pretty well respected. Like it looked like, from a draftsman standpoint, very, very well drawn, but probably not fitted for comics because they look more like Mobius or, the stuff you find in heavy metal. It's like watercolor in there and stuff. And it looked more like paintings. It was so different. And I think a lot of people say, "Oh, this is going to be great." That's true and not true because it was missing that whole dynamic thing that was missing from not ever looking at really like how American superhero comic books are done. So that bombastic, I would have pages drawn in like the magazine format, which is a little wider, and it would have like 15 panels per page, and they're mostly people like either talking heads or just like eye level shots of very repetitive, very boring, but well drawn enough that would get attention. And it did get me the attention of a few key people. So my comic book group when I was in Maryland at the time was Jay Lee, Chris Sprouse, Pop Man, and then another artist named Huang Nguyen. I'm not sure if people remember who those last two are, but they were other popular Asian artists at that time. And that was our group. And I either worked for them or just hung out with them. And then we would all dream of breaking into the industry. And I think one by one, we all did. And so one of the people I met when I was doing the local convention circuit was David Mazzucchelli. And he's, I think what he says is what he saw was in my work was it was one of the few times where it's like ready to go. Like this person is ready to get work. I would disagree, thinking back then what he must have been looking at, but it was completely missing that whole the bombastic in-your-face style, and also the comic book idea of the comic book page, because I was just drawing from panel to panel the way the Europeans did. So he gave me a crash course in how it's done, ideally how it would look, like little things like, make sure that the figures are a different size on every page, move the cameras up or down, move them in and out, try to get, different size heads. So like they have like a close up of an eye in one panel and then a far away shot of tons of people in the crowd in the next panel. So it really feels dynamic. And then just to really push that whole, the visual dynamic power of a comic. And so I learned that first from him, and just kept up with him every few, like a couple times a year. I would find him at a local convention in Washington, DC, or sometimes I go to New York and see him at a show there. And then I went to San Diego and I saw him at a show there and kind of hung out with him, and he would continue my education. He was very generous that way. And then when I was hanging out with him, this guy from Valiant, Steve Masarsky, who was the publisher at Valiant, came by to hire David Mazzucchelli. And David Mazzucchelli, he said, like, well, I don't do that anymore. I don't do that superhero stuff. I do my own thing. And but this guy here is someone you want to look at. So then he said, okay, based on advice, he brought me over to the Valiant booth at San Diego, and I had a portfolio review showing with Barry Windsor Smith. And Barry Windsor Smith just so happened to be, as far as the comic book artists out there, the most like the stuff you would see in Heavy Metal magazine, because he's a European, and he started drawing, and ironically started out in that Kirby Buscema style, but then he left the industry and came back with this pre-Raphaelite, very organic, humanistic style, and that really blew me away. And then he used that style for Weapon X, and that blew my mind, because you can use that style with great effect in an American comic book with a character like Wolverine, and then just make it really badass and get the best of both worlds. And so that was like the gold standard for me of what I wanted to do. And then there I was at San Diego showing my portfolio to him. And I thought that was the best thing in the world. Although, I mean, that's as far as good as it got, because he started to really cut me apart, and almost kind of viciously with the portfolio review, like being not only pointing out things critically, but also just being very mean about it, very demeaning. And then also just really like breaking my spirit. But, you know, I took it all in stride because, you know, this guy's obviously he's a great guy. He's like, to me, he was like a god, and he was teaching me stuff, and I was going to be receptive to all of it. And then that was so important to me that whatever his personality was like, I didn't care. But then at the very end of the portfolio review, I was like, well, you know, I'm not good enough. That's obvious. But, you know, I'm going to get better. I'm going to see him again in a few years, and I'm going to try to, you know, get his approval. But then all of a sudden he says like, well, I just want to let you know that I'd like to get you on at Valiant. I do have to test people to see whether they're trainable. It's like, there's a tremendous amount of potential here. But a lot of artists are not trainable because when you point things out, they start getting very defensive and they're closed off to learning. And he says, you took this review like a champ and you didn't argue anything. So, and he says, I hope you don't mind. I was writing you very hard to see whether you would break, and you didn't. So it's like, so welcome aboard. And I was at Valiant, you know, I packed my bags and moved to New York and worked in their office under him and Bob Layton. And then whoever walked in the door, I mean, you know, there were a lot of great artists that did work for Valiant, and I was right there watching it all. And so it was great learning from Barry Windsor Smith. I learned a lot. And then the other mentor was Bob Layton, who, you know, I think the draftsman that people would kind of point at is Barry Windsor Smith. But I actually had a lot more to learn from Bob, because more than anyone, he just really knew that how the American comic book superhero art communicated the best. He just taught me how to go over the top and just to like cut through all the clutter and just be pure energy, because that was kind of missing in my work. Because, you know, I would draw like people standing around talking really well, but when it came to the fight scenes, how to set up and pay off, all that was Bob. So I had, like, you know, looking back, I had a lot of great teachers. I mean, there was David Mazzucchelli, Barry Windsor Smith, and Bob Layton. All gave me a good amount of time and took me under their wings. And I think I learned an equal amount from all of them. And then from there, after I learned enough, that kind of led me to my first book that I ever got published. Probably still not ready for prime time, but that was Ride in the Future Force #9, which sold like 800,000 copies. Well, I can't say it sold 800,000. Fabian Nicieza always tells me and reminds me that it's 800 or 900,000 copies ordered, because we really don't know how many people bought those. But, you know, the numbers like that for your very first book, I was saying like, wow, this is the greatest business ever.
Yeah. What a decision to go into comic books.
Right. So that was my beginnings in comics. And from there, you know, it was just more and more and more. But so that was how everything first started. And I gotta say, timing played into it, and just meeting the right people. I got lucky in so many ways. I don't even know what I did to get that fortunate to have those people as mentors, and also land at that company at that time, so that my very first paycheck was like 6 figures. And another bit of luck there is that I was always told from my parents, rightfully so, that as an artist, you're probably destined to starve. And as a comic book artist, which is like one of the lowest forms of art, you are absolutely going to starve. So that first paycheck, I put in the bank. I put all but $100 in the bank, because I bought myself a tiny 4-inch screen Sony TV. I don't know if anyone remember those things. So I could put it at my desk while I draw. And that was the only luxury I afforded myself. And the rest was invested. And that was, you know, maybe 30 years ago. So you can imagine how that investment will grow. You know, this leads me to where I am now. I'm able to do my own create your own comic and not have to worry about working for Marvel to pay the bills, because you really need the backing of a big company and the high profile to make a living in this business. But I stepped out and I'm trying to create my own writing for myself and drawing for this company. And I knew that's going to take a bit of a runway, so I have to be able to step away from paid client work for maybe a few years. And I have the luxury to be able to do that. And I don't know what I did to deserve this luck in this business, but the right people, the right place, the right time, and everything, and it leads me to where I am now. So
yeah, I mean, you obviously you are incredibly lucky, but you're also incredibly skilled, and I would not undersell that. But yeah, the time, place, having Bob as a mentor, we had him on the program, and he was talking about just this very thing, that not only when he was at Valiant trying to mentor young artists was partially about the craft, but partially about the business, and partially about sort of, how to, in some ways, live your life and do exactly what you did, which is invest. Don't blow it all on cars and whatever else. And this is how you make it in this business, because it's not always going to be, Valiant in early 90s or Image in early 90s. Things go in waves. And if you, if you're prudent with how you invest now, you'll be better off in the long run. So it's interesting to see your perspective on that as well.
Well, I think if I had listened to a little bit more of what they said, part of what they were teaching is not to sell your original art, which sounded very counterintuitive, and then also not to do commission drawing. And they said that you want to increase the rarity of your work. And, Barry Windsor Smith doesn't sell his artwork very easily. And he just advised that I do the same. And if I didn't listen to him, because, if I was Barry Windsor Smith, I would take that advice, but I'm not. So I just thought, like, the art that I'm doing is never going to be worth more than it is right now. So, and then people are always asking for it. And I held off for a long time, but then I felt I held off long enough because I said no plenty of times. And then I finally said yes and sold a lot of artwork. And then what I thought was a long time was really not long enough, because that stuff would be really worth a lot now. And I let it go for a song. But it just shows, like, those guys, they all really knew what they were talking about. And, not many people, you can tell any kid, like, who has like a 6-figure royalty check, not to spend it on a car or a flat screen TV. They're not going to do that. And so I think I listened the most out of all of them, but there was more advice that I didn't listen to, which is about the original art, and then about just doing commissions left and right. He said that's going to hurt your value. I'm like, I don't care. So, but yeah, I owe a lot to those guys, and the studio system, which just doesn't exist today. People work, right. They want to work from home, and there's a lot of missing knowledge, a lot of industry knowledge that doesn't get transferred because of that.
So when you first came to Valiant, were you working within a studio system? So you were there, like, on location for a lot of it?
Yeah, they call it knob row. It's kind of a slang term for the Valiant art area. And it was always a voluntary thing. Like, they would want you to come in, and they did believe that the artists, if they came in, that they would learn more, and they can also keep an eye on you. I didn't go because it was good for me, necessarily learning wise. I just wanted so much to be in the industry for so long, and I remember so many days of thinking that I was never going to be able to get in. So when someone finally gives you a job and they say, "Oh, by the way, you can come to our office," I'm there every day. I also went to Marvel offices all the time, just to be around people who do this for a living. I couldn't get enough of it. Like, you couldn't keep me home if you tried. And I don't really understand it today. Like, a lot of people choose not to go out and meet people, say, face to face, and be in the middle of it all. I just wanted to be part of comics, and it felt more like I was part of comics if I was there. at the heart of where it was being made. And the only thing I wanted to be in more than in the studios of Valiant was to be in the studio of Marvel's. And so Marvel was always like the bigger fish. And at the time, I thought it was going to be a better place I wanted to get into. So, as you achieve all these milestones, like Marvel was the one that I was looking to get into. And that was a bad attitude because it took away from me realizing what a great place Valiant was, because I was always looking at the greener pastures and Marvel and trying to find a way to get in there, when I really should have been just like enjoying my time at Valiant and saying like, this is really where it's at. That whole idea of Marvel was like a myth in my head, and it really wasn't, the golden place that it was in my head. It was really at Valiant. But, I was kind of just looking over in a very mistaken way that there was a better place to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably something that you can look back in retrospect and say, but for probably a young up and coming artist, you sort of have the Marvel goggles on, or the DC goggles, if that's something someone's interested in. It's hard to say, where you're at is, such a great place to be at a great time, when you grew up with certain characters and you're just like reaching towards them. But so there was a lot in the opening and getting into comics. I just want to go back to, and then I do want to go into Marvel. One was in reading your biography, is that you actually went to college for industrial design. Were you by that point starting to formulate your plans for getting into comics, or was it after college where you're like, do I really want to do industrial design, or do I want to do comics? Like, how did that sort of formulate in your head, and that you wanted to become ultimately a comic book artist?
Well, being from an Asian family, a Chinese family, I think going to college is very important. I couldn't really admit to my parents or myself that I wanted to draw comics for a living. I don't even really think I knew I wanted. I think it was just a popular dream. Like a lot of kids want to be either firemen or cowboys. And you kind of get to an age where you're like, that's not really a serious thing. I mean, a lot of people would just like to be those things, but it may not be in the cards for me. But I was always, when I was taking industrial design, I was always taking art classes on the side. In fact, like when I got to Carnegie Mellon, which is where I went to school, my intention was, I got in there on an art scholarship. And the intent was to actually pursue art all the way, like studio art, and do paintings and become like an artist. But that didn't sit well with me at all, because I just couldn't see myself as a painter and doing like landscapes or abstract art. I'm a very creative person artistically, but there also has to be a very big geek component. Like there has to be some sort of spreadsheets and data and technical skills involved with it. I think art was just too freeform, like anything goes. So I really wouldn't know if I was doing a good job or not, because basically you have to, someone just has to think it's great, and then they have to pay that amount for it. Who knows if it's really that good? But with the more technical things, when you mastered a certain technical thing, like I do a lot of sculpting, like I'm making toys, and when the toy is successful, I mean, it sells, and then whether the plastic cures, all that stuff, I'm creative, but there has to be like a serious technical component, because I'm kind of like a maker at heart, and I don't consider fine arts to be really like a maker. So I did always take art on the side, with maybe in the back of my mind, at least doing comics as a hobby, or just drawing it a lot, just to, I know I wouldn't go into it unless it showed signs of being successful at it, and also whether it could sustain me. And I think one of the things that happened that made me pursue it as a career is that very first paycheck from Valiant. I didn't starve like the way that I was supposed to. Quite the opposite. I was bringing in as much as my father did, who was a doctor. And my mom says, yeah, this is a job you should do. And so I stayed in it. So just being out of the gate, having early success, I think is what cemented that as a career for me. And sadly, it didn't last very long because the bottom fell out soon after that. And then it was very, very lean times. But since I already had momentum going in that direction, and I was in Marvel at the time, I just kept going. And then, things would get better and worse and better. And, that story. But my career was kind of set because I'm also not a person that can pivot to another career. But industrial design was basically, when I left fine arts, the other option was design. So it's either graphic design or industrial design. And I'm kind of like a maker with my hands, and that seemed like a great profession. And I would have gone into it because it is a very good profession right up my alley. But then comics I landed a job in that first. And I do use that skill all the time when I was, it's what led me to Iron Man, basically, is drawing man-made objects better than I could draw people. So it did kind of pay off in that respect.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. My last question for Valiant before we get to Marvel, and maybe it's kind of a segue, is you worked on a number of different titles at Valiant, including Bloodshot, Harbinger, Exo Manowar. Was there one that was your favorite? And could I guess it based on the fact that your next assignment in Marvel was Iron Man?
Well, I don't think that's this is another bit of luck. And I've never really gave it that much thought, but there has been a tremendous amount of luck involved in my career. I didn't really know whether I was ever going to make it into Iron Man. The work was just barely at the level where Marvel would take me as an artist, and probably wouldn't have happened if I just went in there cold and said, I would like to draw for you. But as it happened, remember Heroes Return, first of all, all the Marvel licensed out all the main characters to Image to draw for a while. And that was a big stunt, and that, it paid off. And then eventually when that term was over, those heroes were returning from Image back to Marvel. So then that was another stunt, who's going to be the writer and artist of these books that are returning? And I think there was Avengers, there was Iron Man, Fantastic Four, maybe 4 different books. And I just happened to work my way up through Valiant, and the very top book at Valiant was Exo Manowar. So I've set my sights on Exo Manowar. And then right when that book came out, and I got used to drawing these flying armored people, that's when Heroes Return came about, and they were looking for an artist on Iron Man. So I threw my hat in that ring and said, well, you can look at my Exo Manowar work, and you're within striking distance of what it's going to look like if I drew Iron Man. I mean, you just got to change the colors a little bit, and you will see exactly what it looked like. And because of that, and my skill at industrial design, I think if they gave me a book like Spider-Man or Elektra or even Wolverine, I wouldn't be able to draw it that well because I was not that good at drawing the figure. The faces gave me trouble, expressions gave me trouble, and the figures are kind of stiff. But I drew a lot of the cars, buses, buildings, and airplanes and army stuff. I filled the background with that stuff because I can draw that stuff well, because it's a lot easier than people, because people are organic. So Iron Man kind of forgave my weaknesses because he's all covered up in armor. And then it also looked a lot like Exo Manowar, and I was coming right off of that. So I left Exo Manowar after a few issues, a little early, and then I hopped on to Iron Man, and I was at Marvel on Iron Man at a time when everyone was looking at who are the artists that are going to be taking over the Heroes Return books. And so then I guess I went from Valiant to becoming Marvel A-lister for a while. And so, the workload was immense, and then didn't really have a chance to breathe. But if I did, I would say hey, I made it. This is all I set out to do. I'm at Marvel on a key book, and then everyone's knocking on my door now for autographs or original art or commission drawings. And so all of that stuff would have been really great to celebrate, except that I was already worried about staying in Marvel because they're going to find out that I can't draw that fast. So I just spent all morning, noon, and night just working on Iron Man, trying to draw it really, really well. I remember having to promote the book at San Diego Comic-Con, but still drawing on the airplane, in the waiting room, and the hotel bathroom because there's other people in the room that need to sleep, and just doing everything I can to draw. And I wish I could say that those are great times, but it was all a blur because I was just trying to stay alive at Marvel. And then there was 3 years of that. So, and also another thing, like, I drew Iron Man because he was all covered up, and they would cover all of my deficiencies. But then the book after that was Wolverine. So the armor's gone. He's still not the most fluid guy. He's like very stiff. After that, I did Electro, and then a bit of Amazing Spider-Man. So the characters got progressively more and more naked, and I can tell they can trust that I can draw people now. I can draw faces. So all that learning on the job, you can tell that eventually when they gave me Elektra, which is like a female character who's practically naked running around, that I finally completed my my development and being able to draw anything that they threw at me. So
it sounded like it was a comfortable transition from Valiant to Marvel because of Exo Man of War, armor to Iron Man armor.
Well, I wish I could say, I mean, it was comfortable in that the skill set was there,
right?
But it wasn't comfortable in how I left Valiant before my handshake contract was up. They were in the lurch. I didn't finish out the series, and I didn't leave on the best of terms because I just didn't understand how much I wanted to get in at Marvel, and not only just Marvel, but on the key book at the right time. It's something I couldn't pass up, and I understood that I have to leave. I have to take this job, and I felt like some bridges were burned, but that was a long time ago. Everything is all under the water now. But I remember at the time it was a tough thing to do, but I had to take my chance. So
if you had the opportunity to work on any book coming out of Valiant, would you have chosen Iron Man or would you have chosen another book? Just a hypothetical.
There are books that play to my strength, and then there are books that I actually like. I really liked Harbinger, and then I also Solar is not one of their characters really. I mean, that's one of the ones they licensed, but that book I would have liked. I think I would like to draw, but they kind of choose for me in that, like, the futuristic stuff and the tech background really fit X-Men War. The strange thing is, like, even if you can draw that stuff well, I can draw it well because it's almost like doing math. It's not fun, but I don't like drawing that stuff because it's so technical. Every time Iron Man shows up on a page, and sometimes you can show up 4 times on a page, it takes me an hour to draw that, and a lot of people don't know that when you draw Iron Man's armor, you just don't draw that outline, and then the colorist will make it shiny metal. That shiny metal is up to me. I have to pencil that in there. I have to draw the reflections and make it look, and then to bend the body into those kinds of shapes and into those configurations. But having the metal follow along without cheating it too much was actually very difficult, and it wore me out. But between X-Men War and Iron Man, there were many years of doing that, and it was a book that I knew that people chose me for and wanted to see me draw, so I drew it. But I was glad to leave it, and I know these days, since that's the book I'm still known for, a lot of commissions that come in, it's like, I want to see Iron Man. I was like, okay, it's a lot of work and I don't like drawing him, but people still like the way I draw that character. So I'll just keep doing it because pleasing the fans is something that I have to do. I mean, that's part of being it's if you leave fine arts, you can't, it doesn't really matter what you think a lot. Like, you gotta play to what the people want from you. So,
Sure. Well, let's talk about another Marvel project, a big one for you, which was X-Men: The End, which was part of, these exploratory, I think, comics kind of set in the future of the end of certain titles. And so you got the opportunity to do X-Men with Chris Claremont, of course, kind of
right.
the big architect of the X-Men mythos. Was that a daunting assignment coming onto that book because of the writer?
Well, it's daunting in some ways. There's good and bad about it. I think the thing that, like, a lot of people will think that means a lot to me, working with Chris Claremont. Like, of course, I know who Chris Claremont was, but like I said, I didn't grow up reading these comics. And I think if I did, I would just fall on the floor doing backflips and everything because it's the greatest thing ever. But I'm sad to say that I just wasn't there when he was doing all that work. And actually, I didn't even really read too much of it since then. So I knew who he was because, I read Wizard magazine. I talk to people, like, I know he's a god among us, and he is. But you kind of pick the worst person in terms of if you wanted me to fawn over. So it didn't mean as much to me as it should have. And that's all me, not him. And so it was a lot of work because it was 18 issues in all. And I didn't really think I could do 18 issues, but I did. And that was the good thing about it, is that there's a lot of designing all the characters because everything is in the future. One of the bad things about it is that I always loved the X-Men. They were the Marvel characters before the Avengers. I mean, X-Men, they were sold off to, I don't know, Fox or whatever to make movies. And so Marvel focused on the Avengers and made them cool. But everyone knows the Avengers as a cool one now. But X-Men, when I was in the 90s, that was it. Those were the cool characters. And I got to draw them, but with a caveat is that they were all really old. So I get to draw Rogue, but she's all wrinkled. She's still in shape, but she's got a lot of wrinkles on her face. And everyone's just really old. And then they're not the key appearances. So the collectors are not interested in the art at all because it's, it doesn't really look like,
what they're used to.
Yeah, they're just really, really old. And they're also in different costume, but just like not even looking all that great. So it was all about the story. And I'll admit that it's a style of storytelling that I'm not really familiar with. Like, I think in comics, you kind of make things up as you go along sometimes. What I know about writing stories is it's very premeditated, and you kind of know how everything ends and you work towards it, and there's a theme. Chris doesn't work that way because he does it intuitively, and he does it really well intuitively. It has a huge fan base doing it the way he does it. But it was just really weird to see certain threads starting up that just don't get paid off because you kind of get forgotten and you move on. So it was an interesting experience, and just the sheer number of issues that it took. There's a lot of that art out there that you can get, but that no one buys because they're just older versions. But I don't really care too much about which characters or whether the stuff has the Marvel stamp of approval. When I draw a good scene, one of the things I did was I helped Joe Giella draw, was it Mary Worth? That comic, the daily comic, was just about this old lady who looks like Angela Lansbury, who spent most of the time drinking tea with her friends. And I did some really great art for that, but no one ever collected because they want superhero Iron Man stuff from me. So I think some of my greatest pages are X-Men The End, but a great inker on it. But people are kind of prejudiced against it because it's not the key moment in the X-Men's lives. So,
well, I think it's fantastic. But that does bring me to another question, which is, you've done your fair amount of covers, which I think most modern artists now do a lot of covers and sort of mix it in with their storytelling, inside work. Do you prefer one or the other at this point in time? Do you prefer doing sort of that big splash image or more of the storytelling?
But when I was at Marvel, like, I'm not the fastest artist, and it is possible to get two artists on one book. you can divide the chores up to interiors and covers. And covers take a long time because there's approval and you have to do a really, really good job on it. The interiors, of course, are the most of the work. So I think it was just a bad idea for me to do both because I wasn't fast enough to handle both within a month. So obviously I took the interiors, and then I always invited the editor to pick someone else as the cover artist, because I didn't really value being the cover artist that much. And I just thought that, you can be an interior guy. I think Stuart Immonen talked about like being an interior guy and having a little bit of trouble with being a cover guy, because it's a different mentality. You can hire a great digital artist or an oil painter to do a cover. You can hire like Alex Ross or something to paint a cover. But it's harder to get him to do the entire interior painted. So I just thought the division of labor, just get someone else to do the cover. And, I did a good amount of my covers at Marvel, but when time got really short, I always asked, like, get someone else to do the cover, because that's only going to help the sales. I don't know if anyone's going to buy it because of my cover. And I always had the attitude that someone who just does covers, like, no shade upon them, but this is what I think at the time, is that they're like armchair generals. Like, they're not in the trenches fighting the battle. They're from a place of safety, kind of telling people what to do, not risking their own lives. And then also, like, if you're the guy who does the cover, you're the guy who designs the movie poster. And if for books, you're the guy who does the dust jacket cover. You're not the guy who created the actual movie or wrote the book. You're the guy that just made the cover. And I just thought that comics are about storytelling. So for me, it's interiors. And, I don't say that very lightly, because it's very difficult for me to do interiors. It's enough to break me because it's a tremendous amount of work. But I think that's where it's at. And I do it, even with all that you have to sacrifice to do it. So for me, telling a story, especially a story you create, that means you kind of get the IP and try to sell the idea through your interior pages, and people can see what the story is about and how it plays, and then whether they want to invest in it is all from the interior. And then I'll just get someone who does pretty pictures to do the cover. And, he gets, in my estimation, he gets practically nothing other than the guy who, the payout for doing the cover, and also the payout from selling the original art. But it's pales so much in comparison to the person who created something in the inside. So, and that said, I've done a bunch of covers for lesser companies like Zenescope, and that's a whole other mentality, and it's very rewarding. And when I was doing advertising, I couldn't do the interiors because it's too much work. So the only way I can really keep in this business is taking on covers, 8-page stories, or commission drawings. So
that makes sense. I did want to get into a little bit of, sort of outside comics work, but one more question in the comics realm, which is around DC, which you've done some work for, but not a lot. Is there a reason behind that? Do you not have as much affinity for the characters, or has there just not been the opportunity to work on, those books?
Well, if I was ever at DC, it's just a play to, if you make yourself too available to one company, you can never really, it's hard to ask for a raise, especially if you're not really secure about your artwork. Not being secure about your artwork makes it better because you work really hard at it, but it makes it really hard to go in there and demand a raise because you don't really think you deserve it. You're just playing a part, like you're acting. And I know I could get one, but I'd have to do some acting to pretend like I'm very confident. The easiest way is when someone at DC says, if you come over here, we'll match your rate, or we'll give you a raise. Then I don't have to go through that thing of asking for a raise. I just go over there, and then Marvel will ask for me back. Hopefully Marvel will ask for me back at a higher rate. And it's that little ping pong that people do just to move their rate up. I have nothing against DC. I just thought that Marvel characters were just much cooler. I mean, I love Spider-Man. I love the X-Men. And then the biggest character at DC was kind of like Superman, and he kind of felt like I think he kind of lacked the flaws that make a great character. He's a little too much like a Boy Scout, and I think Marvel was the more darker, realistic company that kind of fit what I liked. Um, but that said, I did quite a bit of work. Really, they're very similar. Once you can't really tell who you're drawing for on a day-to-day basis, because the characters are pretty much, the things have kind of moved back and forth to the point where, like, if you want it dark and gritty, there's Batman over at DC. So it all kind of evened out, and I just primarily would work for whoever expressed interest in having me, and then made the best case, because a job could end, and then no one can call you. So if it's DC that's calling you and they really want you, then I'll go there, because it seems like there's an interest in my work over there. So
that also makes sense. So I wanted to get into a little bit of your sort of outside of actual comics work. That doesn't mean that necessarily some of it is outside of the whole comic book world, but some of it, like, doing design for licensing and, commercial products for Marvel, for instance, is within the comics realm, but not comic books. What did you find? I don't know if you're still doing it, but so I don't know if to set this question in the past or present, but what do you find different about that kind of work, and do you find it more fulfilling? Is it do you exercise a different muscle when you're doing like style guides and putting characters on certain products rather than the comic book itself?
I mean, I think a lot of people will think that these are choices that I made. Like, I really want to do this, and then I make it happen. A lot of times the job would end and there's nothing. And then someone would ask, like, will you do this? And it's like, well, I don't really want to, but I don't have anything else. So I would end up working for Marvel's creative services division. And I think one of the reasons why I did pretty well over there was because, and it's not for a good reason, like, I think my draftsmanship ability was pretty darn high. Like, I can draw really well, but I had no discernible style. If you look at like someone like Humberto Ramos or Olivier Coipel, you can instantly tell it's not really that their work is really good, but they have a very loud style that's worth paying for and worth, writing home to mom about. I don't think I have that. All I have is just really good draftsmanship, and maybe I'm too close to see whether I have a style or not. But I draw people that look like people, and they're really, like, I don't really draw like honking big noses or anything like that. I just, it's right down the middle of the road, but drawn, I think, very well from a academic standpoint. Like, all the anatomy and perspective is right on. So I think that made me a great fit for Marvel's creative services division, because they don't really want a strong style. They just want to let everyone know what the character looks like, so they can impose their own style over it. So when I got in there, they had me draw like a bunch of style guides. And another thing is that it paid better than regular Marvel work. And you draw like a figure without the backgrounds, and that's a lot easier than drawing like lots of spaceships and buildings. And then sometimes I had to draw buildings for backgrounds for the lunch boxes so they can put different figures on top. So I had to draw just buildings, which is easier than drawing a building with a figure in it. So in that sense, like, it did play up to all of my strength, and I did it for a long while. So it's really cool, like walking down Walmart and saying, like, hey, I drew that set of buildings there. So yeah, I didn't choose it, but it chose me. It fits the way that I draw, and it paid more. And also I would always welcome any chance to like get away from interiors, because as much as I love drawing interiors, it does, for me, it's a struggle, and it kills me, and it takes me away from the family. Like, I am not a good husband or father when I'm drawing a book, which is on a schedule. I'm just not present. I have to take care of this first, and then I'll get to them. But then as soon as this book ends, another one begins, and the clock is already ticking on the next issue. So to step off and do stuff for Marvel, like style guide stuff, and those little jobs, they're a lot easier. And I did do a lot of them after I left to do advertising art. So I did that for a while, and then you can still scratch your itch of drawing superheroes without doing the book at Marvel by by doing advertising and just handling smaller illustration jobs at Marvel or DC.
And what about you've talked or referenced already sculpture and toy design, but you also do, I think, other types of design as well, both 3D and 2D draftsmanship type things. Are you always, is it sort of, do you try to balance kind of all of the different types of work that you're interested in, or is it where the kind of opportunity is at that moment in time?
There is a term for the type of person. I really didn't know who I was. I felt like I was very alone, but I'm a person that kind of creates things, preferably in 3 dimensions, because you can actually be in the world with it. Drawing stuff, it's more like you're drawing hypothetical things, and they're 2-dimensional, and these worlds don't really exist. But I would make toys. I would another thing I do is renovate houses and build furniture, and just build all sorts of things. And those things, the interest in one category or another would just come and go. But when you do comics for a career, that's the one that you have to do. And I would be doing my 15th issue of Iron Man, but I really want to make this kind of Randy Bowen type statue of Wolverine. I don't get to because I'm drawing Iron Man, so that's very frustrating. And one time I did tell, when I was on Nova, I told my editor that I need to take 1 or 2 issues off, which is, no one likes that. His editor was very proud of the book, and he had a perfect idea of what it would be like, my work on 4 or 6 issues on a trade paperback, and I want to take 2 of those off. And he's like, all right, I'll make it work. But, if I had to tell him why, it's because I wanted to build my own kitchen. I want to hang the cabinets, and I wanted to set the tile, and I want to do the plumbing and the electrical. And to me, that was something that I was intensely interested in, is actually building something that we're going to use. And ironic, I would get a lot more money. I would save a ton of money doing my own kitchen. And also, because of how I put it together, I could sell the house for it. I did sell the house for a ton of money based on the stuff that I did in there. It made so much more money than doing just another issue of Nova. And so it was the right business decision. But I think Marvel's got to pay more to their artists so that this doesn't happen, because I made so much more money taking a month off building my kitchen than doing Nova and hiring contractors to do it. And it's so easy to get any job that pays more than comics, especially if you're a slow artist like me. Like, I'm slow drawing comics, but I'm a lot faster in sculpting and renovating houses and building all sorts of knickknacks. So the term now for that type of person is maker. And once that term came out and became popular, it's like, oh, I was a maker. There's other people like me out there. And the thing that I say that I would like to make the most is comics. And that doesn't mean that I can only do comics, but if I had to choose, it would be comics. So.
Great. I mean, it seems like you've found your tribe, so to speak, the makers of the world, whether that's, comics or anything else. But I like that the anchor, and we've talked to a number of other artists that are sort of like you, that have interests outside of comics, but sort of the anchor is always comics. I remember Bill Sienkiewicz, who has done commercial art and fine art and all kinds of other stuff, but he always sort of comes back or is anchored in comics. And being in comics broadcast, we love to hear about that.
It's a fantastic medium. I think it's so overlooked. I don't even know how to describe why it's so great. But a lot of us are starving to stay in it. And that's sad, because I guess I gave it up because it didn't feel right, because I wasn't making that much money in it, and I was putting my family in a tough spot, and it was being very selfish, just satisfying this thing that should be kept as a hobby. So I went off into advertising, made much more money there. Then the pandemic came around, and I discovered YouTube and all these people who do these channels that talk about comics and how there's a war going on, either between ideology or and the bottom line, and the comic book industry is in a terrible state. And there was sort of like a call to arms. I took it as a call to arms. Like there's too many unqualified people drawing comics that don't have their chops. It's breaking them, and they're complaining a lot on Twitter about how it's horrible. And their work that comes out, they don't have their drawing chops. They don't have the experience, and they're not willing to fight to get better. They just quit, because that's what the kids do now, is they quit. I mean, I feel really old saying that, but it's just too much work, and they don't have the experience. And then there's a war going on between, like, these people are getting in and they're ruining the industry. So we need, and I took that as a call to arms. Like, hey, I'm one of those guys who is qualified to actually play in this realm. And I see other people in the trenches, and they're suffering for their art, and they are starving for their art. And I was like, wow, I wasn't willing to do that, but I can see people are doing that. So if I wanted to draw interiors again, and then make no money, that's okay, because I'm propping up a great American art form. I mean, I know it's not strictly American because there's manga and everything, but the way we do it here is a true American art form that's underappreciated. And I don't know if it'll be underappreciated forever, but it's a great medium, and it's worth sacrificing for. So I'm back in it, and then I'm in there with the other people, like the cartoonist kayfabe people who are suffering their way through a tube and making it work however way possible. But the idea of coming up with a story and then telling the story, because you're an artist, that you can, and get people excited about it, and then it can get packaged into having life outside of just comics. You've just created an IP, whether it's successful or not. You created something, and a lot of people create IP, but what it looks like is just like a whole bunch of words, and it's like, this is my idea. It's not really realized. It's just basically an idea that's all typed out to be visualized by someone else. But I don't have to do that. I can bring it all the way to market in a form that tells a story in one of the best mediums out there, fairly quickly and cheaply, because you don't have to hire actors or cameras or anything like that. In that sense, I think it's really great, and just really kind of underappreciated. So.
Agreed. I mean, that's why we try to, highlight creators like you, and that have the passion for the art form, and really bring more attention to the art form, because I think people are discovering it only now through movies and TV. They don't understand this sort of the history and the value of the comics from which all this has sprung, But anyway, I think it's a good segue to, as we start to close out, you have a new Kickstarter coming out soon. What can you tell us about that project? I know some things you want to keep under wraps, but what can you tell us about that new project?
Okay, well, I don't know if I had the courage to strike off on my own and leave Marvel, but my publisher, Carl Choi, made it very easy for me. I was just coming back from advertising, and then being hired to do stuff for Marvel again. And I thought that, I would really get a leg up on Marvel. I mean, get a firm foothold in Marvel if they would ask me to do another book before this one's done. And they did offer up, before I was finished with Iron Fist, they said, oh, we're thinking of you for a Star Wars book. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds really cool. So I can see where this is going. Like, I think I'm back at Marvel again. And after being gone for so long, there's a good chance I can build up my name and become just a Marvel artist, and all the great stuff that comes with that. But that came about the same time that Carl Choi wanted me to do something creator owned based on an image I had drawn, an image I drew 20 years ago of this robot gorilla and this robot girl. And he asked me to create a story around it, hypothetically. So, just as an exercise, and I did. And then he thought, well, that's really good. And let's take it to the next level and the next level. And it's all kind of like fun and games, kind of like what if type thing. And then finally he told me, well, it's time to start this book. Right at the time when I got that Marvel offer for a Star Wars book. So I had to make a real decision whether I wanted to stay at Marvel and build my name back up again, or to kind of go into obscurity for a while and draw something that I create on my own. So I having saved up quite a bit of money and having a long runway, I figured I'd give this a try. And so we put this book together. It's called EVERMIND. So there's a Kickstarter that's launching sometime in the middle of September. Yeah, we're very excited about it because it's my first time actually writing a story. And I think people know what to expect of my artwork. But when it's your own book, then your artwork kind of levels up. So that's something new to look at there. What they don't know and what I can't guarantee is the writing part, because I have no experience writing, and there's really no way to really tell whether you're going to be good at it. But, I make up for that in many ways. Like, I know from experience that if you're not really, don't have much experience with something, you can better your odds by just taking a lot more time and just being very judicious about how you go about it. So if the average Marvel writer comes up with a story in a couple of weeks, like, I would take a couple of years. And I know I can make it better if I kind of, think outside the envelope and then think of the story like, 9 ways to Sunday. And during that whole time, drawing or trying to figure out how to do this, I can educate myself. I've taken lots of writing classes and watched a lot of master classes, a lot of YouTube stuff. And I realized that I do have an innate storytelling ability. And then, so in this book, if you're wondering like how it compares to other books that might be on the stands, like it's taken a longer time to write because I wanted to do a good job on it. And it is very, it's a novel, unique idea. I think that's one of the things that a lot of people say that comics are not in such a great shape. Sometimes they'll blame like ideology or woke. I'm not sure if any of that's true. Who knows like what's really causing them to stumble? But I'm pretty sure I know. I think the story is very difficult. They have to spit things up now very quickly, and it takes time to write a good story, and it takes time to find a person who knows story. So this one it's a novel idea, and I think it's written very well. And another thing we do that other people don't do is we have beta readers and kind of like focus group. We'll take a finished first issue, take it around to different comic book stores and get their most hardcore readers, actual readers. Because a lot of people don't read comics, but for the people who do, we get their opinions on the story and what was confusing them, what they liked. And then we actually go back and revise the story to be tighter, more understandable, and more exciting. So our end product is actually, it's been worked on way more than your average comic book, like maybe like 10 times more. The art is a lot of times in care in the artwork, and a lot of time and care in the writing. And it is a new novel idea. And yeah, I think that, if anyone wants to see what it reads like, the entire first issue is available at the 24/7 Comics website. And so, the entire first issue, because that could include spoilers, but what we have coming up beyond the first issue doesn't really make this like a spoiler, because there's so much more to come and so much more exciting stuff. So all the beta readers have really liked it, and which is a surprise to me, being very new to this, but I was very thankful for that. And then we made it even better with all the feedback. So if you want to see a labor of love that's handled in a different way than most comics, which is kind of like thrown out there to cover up shelf space or to house the variant covers, this is an actual comic that you should read and that you will want to read it. And I think if you start reading it, you will finish reading it, and you will buy the future issues based on what we know so far from reader responses. So it's called EVERMIND, and I'm sure maybe if you could put up the information about where the Kickstarter is. I just don't know it offhand at the moment. So.
Oh, we absolutely will when it launches, and it sounds like a really interesting concept, and the fact that you're doing focus groups and really like taking it seriously, what people think about it and where to take the book is an interesting approach that I don't think I've heard about before. So I think it can only result in a better book. So we're very excited and looking forward to that, and we'll definitely add that to the show notes. And speaking of that, for fans that want to follow you, see what you're up to, get more information on the Kickstarter, where are you on social or websites or what have you?
I've been told to stay off Twitter from so I'm on Instagram, and I kind of post stuff, whatever's on the drawing table, practically every day. So that's Sean Chen Art on Instagram. And yeah, so just follow me there, and you'll get links to everything that I'm doing, especially EVERMIND, which is coming up very soon. So I hope that people check it out.
And we are back. Mike, this is a great interview. Very interesting. I really like hearing about Sean's career as well as his Kickstarter. And I love Sean's art. Kind of the newer art or artists that or as Oren's definition go, new art. Has a great style, and I love his work on Wolverine. So this was a great interview, and great job as always.
Yeah, I love talking to Sean. As I said in the beginning, he is an interesting artist because he not only does comic book art, he did some work for Marvel's production company, doing some licensing work, some style guides, but also outside of the realm of comics completely with design. I mean, he has an industrial design background, does furniture design, interior design, home renovations, things like that, designs his own toys and action figures. So really kind of a Renaissance man in that way. And yeah, definitely keep up with his work. Definitely back EVERMIND on Kickstarter. And thank you for listening. Thank you for rating 5 stars, reviewing, subscribing. What else can you do? You can probably go to $bandits.buzzsprout.com. Hit that support button. That'll help us. And you can go to TwoMorrows Publishing, which we didn't mention, who is our sponsor, TwoMorrows.com. Check them out. Thank you again for listening and viewing, and we'll see you next time. Peace.